So after going through the comments on yesterday's video, I felt compelled to do a follow-up because going through, there were so many different viewpoints and opinions offered that I felt I really needed to get back to this topic, clarify exactly what I was saying, and address some issues that, are misconceptions that could get you hurt or killed. Now, in a very real sense. So we have to first put this in context. The video we did yesterday was about using a classic car as a daily driver, putting it out on the road in traffic. And my opinion on this is that if you're going to do that, leave the car as stock as possible. Don't mess around. Mixing and matching and modifying a car can create unintended consequences. All right. So going through the comments, there were a lot of people who did extensive modifications to their daily driver car. Now, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to do. I mean, clearly, I screw around with cars. I build hot rods. I know, I get it, okay? But that's not the concept that we were trying to put across here. The idea is for the average person, the average enthusiast, not somebody who's not somebody who has a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge and a lot of skill, but the average person who wants to get into the classic car thing or start using a classic car as a daily driver. That's who we were addressing. My philosophy with that is leave the car alone. I practice what I preach. The cars that I drive, the cars that I put on the road as daily drivers are as stock can be. Now, let's talk about suitable for purpose, because this has a lot to do with it, all right? So some of you guys have made extensive modifications to your car. So you say, well, yeah, I did the brakes, I did the suspension, I put wheels, you name it, I did it, changed it, right? Did you do that because you wanted to as a hobby? That's fine. Nothing wrong with modifying your car. Again, see, I modified cars. I get it. I get the whole point of modifying cars. Or did you do it because the car that you chose to use as a daily driver wasn't suitable to the purpose? Like, for instance, if you take let's say a 1960 Falcon, or okay, let's stick with Mopars because that's what I do, right? But the equivalents there, a Nova, a Falcon, a Dart, or a Valiant, or a Lancer. Did you take a car, like an economy car from the very early 60s that has drivetrain, suspension, and braking that's intended to just take the housewife to the grocery store and back, something that's only going to be used around town? Because I actually have a car like that I use as a daily for 10 years, and that's exactly the purpose that I used it for, just around town. 1964 Dart, I've got it sitting right over here, and I'm going to go to that car in a second. It's what I used it for. At the time that I was using that car as a daily, trips out of town were a rarity. The furthest I would really ever go would be to Nashville. And I had other vehicles to use when I needed to go take a trip or haul something heavy or do whatever. I've always had multiple vehicles. But the one that I use as my daily, because my daily reality was just scooting around town, was a 1964 Dart with a 170 slant 6, push-button automatic, and stock everything. I put a set of slot wheels on it because it felt like it looked really cool on the car. And you've seen this thing in the background since we started doing this channel. It's always been hanging around the background because I am going to get around to going through her and poofing her up and everything. I want to keep the car in the family. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Now, if I was going to try to take that car with the 170 slant 6 and the 9-inch drums and the light-duty everything that it was born with, and now use it to carry passengers long distance, high speeds, right? No, it's not suitable for purpose. I picked the wrong car. So if I'm going to use that car, now I have to modify it in every way, shape, and form. I got to probably put a V8 in it. I have to upgrade the suspension, upgrade the brakes. I have to do all of this, but it all has to be done as an integrated package. So if you did pick a classic car to use as your daily driver and had to do all of these modifications, perhaps you started with the wrong type of car. And again, nothing wrong with modifying a car to bring it up to speed if that's where you're at. But for the average person, again, they don't have the experience, the knowledge, the tools, the time. They just want to drive a cool old car, right? Because that's the vast majority of people out there. Remember, if you're a real blood and guts hot rodder, right? You're a real blood and guts mechanic, you're in the minority. You're not the average person watching these videos and trying to learn this stuff. So you have to always take that in perspective. So let's go back. A couple of things. Again, overriding comments, overriding sentiments. One of them was about upgrading the master cylinder, because previous to 1967, most cars, there were a few that had dual circuit masters. Most cars had a single circuit master cylinder, and I have one here on this dart. Now, here's the thing with this. I have driven both single and dual circuit master cylinders and had brake lines pop, wheel cylinders pop, all sorts of brake failures. And what I found through the course of my life of doing this, right, as both a hobby guy and as a mechanic, right, who worked on countless cars over the decades, what I have found is that single or dual circuit, right, so here's a single. Okay, and again, this was my daily driver for 10 years. Single or dual circuit gives you exactly the same indication that you have a major failure. So you step on the brake pedal, and all of a sudden, it gets mushy and starts going down, right? Well, if you have half a brain in your head, at that point, you pull over and you see what's going on. Because if you pop brake hose or a wheel cylinder, whatever it is, it's causing this massive failure. You will get a couple of stops. You'll get at least one, usually 2, 3, or 4 stops out of a single circuit. Now, the federal government mandated a dual circuit in 1967. And they did it because it makes sense. It is a good idea. I'm not saying it's not a good idea to divide the systems. But they give you the same indication. And when one of the 2 reservoirs is empty, you really have no braking. The pedal is still going to go 90% of the way to the floor, and your stopping power is going to be limited to just that very last bit of travel of the brake pedal, and above 10 or 15 miles an hour, there is no braking, zero braking, right? So as somebody who has dealt with both, there is no difference, right? If you have half a brain, you see what I'm saying? If you have half a brain. Unfortunately, most people don't have half a brain. And the dual circuit may get you several more stops in a brake failure situation, but ultimately, when the thing goes to the floor, you've got the same braking power as you have with a single circuit. Now, that said, if it makes you feel better, to convert from a single pot to a dual pot, well, then go ahead and do it. It's not a big deal. It's not a, you know what I mean? Make sure you do it right. You know, make sure you use the right type of flare on the lines. Make sure you use the right type of metering block. You know, make sure you do it right. But if it makes you feel better, if it makes you sleep better at night knowing that you have 2 reservoirs instead of 1, well, then go ahead and do it, right? But just keep in mind, the very first time you come to a stop, you go to stop the car, and the brake pedal feels spongy or starts to move out from underneath you, pull over. Don't drive it any further. Both the single and the dual will both give you that exact feel, the exact circumstance. All right, so like if it makes you feel better, go ahead and do it. I never bothered to because, like I said, I've had failures in both, and it's the same thing. So now, there were many people who commented that, yeah, if you're going to hop up the engine, if you're going to make more horsepower, you have to upgrade the brakes. Ooh, I am going to do an entire video on this because high-performance braking is, believe it or not, it's one of the things that I'm very, very familiar with. So just keep this in mind. There is absolutely zero correlation between horsepower and brakes. The 2 are mutually exclusive. One thing has nothing to do with the other. There is a relationship between velocity and mass and brakes. but zero relationship between horsepower and brakes. Keep in mind, they're mutually exclusive, okay? Horsepower happens when you step on the gas. Brakes happen when you take your foot off the gas. The two are mutually exclusive. Now, again, I'm going to do a whole video on high performance or modifying or upgrading a braking system for that circumstance. But just because you put headers on a 4-barrel and a cam in your car does not mean that you automatically have to trash the original braking system. They have nothing to do with each other. Again, I'll do a whole video on that. Now, here's the important one, and here's the one where if like ignorance or half knowledge will get you in so much trouble. All right, and these are the guys who do the brake conversion. Now, there were a couple of comments in that video where people were like, I converted my car to front disc brakes. They didn't say that they completely reworked their system. They say, I converted my car to front disc brakes, and so I know it's a better, safer package than it was. Okay, you are wrong, right? And listen, take this with the intent that it's offered, okay? In the spirit that it's offered, right? I'm not, right? Okay. You are wrong. You are absolutely wrong. You created a more dangerous package. You don't know it because you haven't put yourself in that situation yet, and you don't know it because you don't really understand braking dynamics completely. But you made your car more dangerous by only switching to the front brakes, or the front disc brakes. So here's first I'll give you a practical example, and then I'll give you a dynamic example. The practical example is my 67 Charger that we went through over the early part of the year. So that car, when I got that car, somebody had converted it to front disc brakes. They used just regular replacement spindles and everything. It was the right stuff for the car. But originally that car had 11-inch drums all the way around, and it has a metering block instead of a proportioning block, and it's a manual brake car. So for the first, couple of few years that I had the car, I was like, okay, I'm going to have to get around and do something with the brakes on this thing. But I use it so seldomly. We would just take it out, beat it up a little bit, and put it away. I use it so seldomly that I didn't really worry about it. But now I want to actually take the car out and use it and drive it. And so now I really have to think about this. So they had converted the car from front drum, from 11-inch front drum, to stock disc brake package, but didn't touch anything else. Now with that car, we had a couple of things. The first is that it took a huge amount of pedal effort to slow the car down, more than you would expect, right? So, which is no big deal. I'm not a little old lady. I can push on a brake pedal, right? But generally speaking, disc brake cars have power brakes. So now if I wanted to maintain and keep that car drivable to the point that, when I say drivable, I mean I could toss the keys to anybody and say, here, go ahead, take it for a ride, right? If I want to maintain that type of drivability with the car, I would have to convert it to power brakes, which is something I don't want to do. I like the simplicity of having the manual brakes. But here's the kicker of it. They didn't change the metering block for a proportioning valve, and they left the 11-inch drum brakes in the back. So what would happen was, when you got up to speed, let's say I wanted to rapidly stop the car. Now, I had never been in an emergency situation with this car, but I did play around with it just to see what would happen. So you get the car up to like 40 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour, lay into the brakes hard, and it would immediately lock the back wheels. Because the master cylinder, first, is taking a lot of pressure to activate the front brakes. That same pressure, because it's going through a metering block and not a proportioning valve, is getting transferred to the back brakes. And the back brakes have greater grabbing ability than the discs on the front. Interesting fact, I've already talked about this, interesting thing about drum brakes. Do you know that NASCAR did not allow disc brakes in their cars until 1975? Did you know that? NASCAR insisted, that was part of the rules, car had to have drum brakes because they felt that the drum brakes were more efficient. They would drag the car down from a stop from 180, 190 miles an hour. They would drag the car down from a stop quicker and more efficiently than disc brakes. Now, I know the disc brake is better. I get that. I know that. Technology moves on, right? But disc brakes are not new technology. Disc brakes are, it's 75, it's 80-year-old technology. It's just, now it's the common thing. But NASCAR felt that the drum brake did a better job of taking a 4,000-pound car and hauling it down from 170, 180, 100 miles an hour to zero a better job than the equivalent disc brake of the day would. So NASCAR, now don't take my word for this stuff, this is NASCAR. All right. So because the back of the car had so much more gripping power than the front of the car, 40, 50 mile an hour, hard stop, it would lock the back wheels. So what was I going to do with this car? Do I continue the conversion? Do I put a proportioning valve in it and then convert the back brakes to the smaller 10-inch drums to equalize the braking? No, that really wouldn't make much sense. So I converted the car back to 11-inch front drums. So now it's manual, and both wheels, both front and back, have the proper proportion, the proper braking proportion. The car stops beautifully. It stops straight, it stops quick, there's no drama, there's nothing. Now, here's another thing too, because a couple of people mentioned that one of the problems with drum brakes is that when you step on the brake, you never know which way the car is going to go. Now, if the braking system is adjusted evenly in the front, and here's the important thing, both wheel cylinders are functioning properly. That'll never happen. The reason that drum brake cars will cause the car to dive if both brakes are adjusted, normally, is that one of the shoes in the wheel cylinder, because remember the wheel cylinder has two shoes, is stuck in the bore. And this is very common for a braking system that's been neglected. So if the braking system hasn't had the fluid flushed, let's say in 20 years, whatever it is, right? Because who really flushes their brake fluid? Well, the moisture ends up in the wheel cylinder and it'll seize one of those. So what happens now is that you go to step on the brakes, and on one side of the car you'll have both shoes pop out and apply the brakes, and on the other side you'll only have one. So you'll have uneven braking power and it'll do that. So, or actually it could be a constricted hose also, which will give you that same issue if you're dealing with a disc brake car. Step on a brake and it'll try to steer itself. So if the brakes are functioning correctly, if everything is up to snuff and they're adjusted correctly, no, it'll stop dead straight. So like I said, with the Charger, we converted it back to 11-inch drum brakes all the way around, and it's perfect. You could not ask for a nicer braking car. Now, here's what happens. Here's the problem. And like I said, there were a couple of comments. I know I made my car safer by switching to disc brakes. Well, if the only modification you did was change from drum to disc on the front, and let's say you put a master cylinder on it that matched that, with the small chamber for the rear and the big for the front. Let's just say those are the only two modifications that you made. You made your car more dangerous. You're not realizing it. You're going down the road at 55, 60 miles an hour. There's a bend in the road, okay? It's not a dead straight road. There's a bend in the road. 200 feet in front of you, a deer steps out, or a kid runs out, or whatever it happens to be, and you need to panic stop this car. When you lay into the brakes, there's going to be action. You are absolutely not going to hit the deer or the kid or whatever obstacle, the car that pulled out there. You're not going to hit it with the front of your car. You are going to hit it with the back of your car, because the back of your car will lock up. Those back wheels will lock up. On a turn, 50 miles an hour, 60 miles an hour, it doesn't be a crazy turn, just a bend in the road. You lay into those brakes, the back wheels, if you don't have it, if you didn't do the entire system and work the back brakes, or I should say set up the back brakes so they have the same proportioning that the factory would have put in there, when you lay into the brakes, those back wheels lock up. They're getting too much pressure, or they're oversized. They're going to lock up and the back of the car is going to swing around. Is this theory? Is this something that I'm just... No, this is practical experience. I have done this. I have been there. I have gotten the t-shirt. I know all about it. The car is going to want to swap ends on you. If you make aggressive or panic braking around a turn without balancing the braking front to back, you are going to swap ends. There's no question about it. It's going to happen. You did not make your car safer by just converting the front to disc brakes. It's the things that you don't know, or the things that you don't understand, or the things that you haven't experienced that will get you hurt or killed. Or worse, get somebody else hurt or killed. Because my philosophy is always, if you buy the ticket, you take the ride. And that goes back to the beginning of this video. If you're dealing with a daily driver, and in order to make that daily driver livable in today's world, you have to make these extensive modifications, well, then you have the wrong car for the purpose. There's lots of cars that were built, especially in the 70s. You get into the 70s, the middle 70s, and all of the things we talk about as far as like good suspensions with sway bars, disc brakes, all of these engineers, this all became standard equipment by 1975, 1976. So, right car for the right job. All right. So I hope you got something out of that. Please think, really, seriously, please think. It's important to all of us. I'll see you tomorrow.